it's another year in the special military operation and another spring. And so this raises the question, will this be the year? Will this be the year that Russia finally launches the spring offensive? This is something that, for the last couple of years at least, people have been anticipating that at some point Russia's going to have to stop um, just grinding advances, going slow, relying on aggressive attrition, as Alexander Mercouris puts it, relying on firepower, and actually try to win the war decisively. That is a large scale offensive across either the entire front line or just an attempt to get back to a war of motion where you're starting to try to capture huge tracts of territory and destroy entire units in days instead of weeks or months. So we've seen lots of offensives, many big and many that have resulted in tens of thousands of deaths. But we haven't really seen what's known as a big arrow, but I like to call a YOLO offensive from Russia since the beginning of the war. And the question is, are they going to launch another one? Is there going to be something of that scale, of that ambition, with the hope being that they can basically just crush what's left of the Ukrainian army? That it's so demoralized, that it's so low on resources, on manpower, that it's so spread out, that the balance of power has gone so much in Russia's favor that they will just kind of be able to surge forward and just destroy everything in its path and advance to the Dnieper and cause the collapse of the Zelensky government and basically dictate terms is the current logic. And I think it's gotten a lot more likely uh, recently, as I think Putin has largely given up on attempting to come to any sort of negotiated settlement. That's not necessarily that if Ukraine and America accepted his terms, he wouldn't abide by them. But basically, Ukraine is not going to negotiate as long as Zelensky's in power. Either he's going to have to be removed from power by the Russians, or if he did try to negotiate, then the Azov boys or some of the other ultranationalists would kill him. So this is kind of what we're all waiting for. We know that there's going to be an offensive at some point. That Russia's going to have to try to end this war, but it hasn't happened so far. So I guess the question is, what's different this year, Argent? Because you said that this was going to happen last year. You said this was going to happen. You talked about the spring offensive, the Russian 100-day offensive, and this never played out. And that is a good point. And I've been wrong about a lot of stuff throughout this war. Now, primarily, what I tend to be wrong about is timelines. I'm generally fairly good when it comes to the macro picture, stuff like that. How the overall war is going, how the disposition of forces, military equipment, the overall strategic picture. I do admit, though, I'm frequently wrong when it comes to timelines. And we'll talk about that a bit more later. But once again, as I've said many times, the tempo of this war is very different from what we're used to. It's very slow and methodical. And it's not just me. I feel like people on all sides of this really hype it up. Like if you watch any of the military vloggers on YouTube, they hype everything up. They're like, "Oh, this is the big offensive. This is the biggest offensive ever. This is amazing." And they basically do this for everything that happens. And people just kind of constantly get excited and wound up and then something happens, but it's not the like big bang, the big Hollywood climax that we're all waiting for. Once again, this is the Ukrainian cinematic universe. This whole war is being run on movie logic. So, I have heard though, and this is not just from this is from all kinds of different sources. The Ukrainians are saying this. Various Western sources are saying this. Russian sources are saying this. That Russia is getting so Russia has been recruiting new divisions over the last couple of years. I won't get into too much detail, but they basically massively increased the amount of money that they were paying their soldiers and added all these bonuses in, and basically that solved the recruiting problem. And Russia hasn't had to use conscription past the initial call up. Now there are conscripted. There's still conscription going on, but that is for normal military service, and those people will are like young Russian males who will serve a year in the army and then go back to civilian life. They will not be sent to the front lines. So just keep that in mind. The actual fighting is almost entirely being done by volunteers at this point in time, and they are given a full training set. They are given a full round of training, which is 6 months to a year. The Russians, at least post Wagner with the whole convict thing, uh, don't really like throwing soldiers into combat that don't have adequate training. So they've been building up all these new divisions. I've heard that they're going all across the front lines into various points, just kind of as a reserve, just behind the where the fighting is. There's also just been a lot of reports of supply and ammunition depots being built, highways, railroads. Just the logistics for a major offensive seem to be building up. And as we'll see, if Russia is going to do it, I think this is just about the best time that they're going to get, unless they want to delay another year and just let this thing keep going on. I think this is probably where they should do a YOLO offensive. Okay, so I like to do some self criticism, not of the Maoist variety, but go back and say, okay, what did I get wrong? How is it actually different? Because it's one thing to just say constantly, oh, well, I was wrong this time, but I'm right this time. I went through and I kind of said, what is different from 2024? Why might there be an offensive now is there wasn't last year? So I have 12 points here, so we're just going to go through them. This is just to organize my thoughts. So I think the single biggest one is Biden's gone. I think there was always probably some sort of fear within the Russians, even if it was something they didn't really want to admit out loud, that Biden would directly get involved with the war if it looked like Ukraine was about to completely lose. That is, if the Ukrainian army was collapsing, if Kiev was falling, if Zelensky's government was just fleeing to the four winds, that Biden would send in U.S. troops or threaten to use nuclear weapons or do something crazy. And that is past. And Trump is not, I don't think, I think the odds of Trump using nuclear weapons or directly committing the American army to defend Ukraine is extremely low. So that very possible danger has completely passed at this point, and they don't really have to worry about the US going all in and directly confronting them. So I think that that's very important. Also, without the U.S. Providing a backstop, the Europeans are going to be sending their soldiers in either. So I think that that is, from kind of a meta perspective, very important. Secondly, the military aid is running out. I mean, we had the 56 billion or whatever it was that was passed last year. I don't think any additional Ukrainian aid has been appropriated, aside from whatever the drawdown stuff is or the stuff they send in behind the scenes. And then there's obviously like the intelligence sharing and stuff like that, which is probably equivalent to billions of dollars as well. But there hasn't been a new appropriation passed. And if they were going to pass a new one, Trump would have to go to Congress and get Congress to support it. And MAGA is generally speaking not in favor of funding the war further. That's kind of what Trump ran on. That's what a lot of his supporters want. So if he was to pass it, he would have to basically get like the rhinos and the Democrats to pass it. And it would be immensely embarrassing and politically difficult. And I just don't think he would eat crow and do that. So once the current round of American aid runs out, I don't think there's going to be another official appropriation. Okay, third, we had the Kursk operation, which was a disaster. Now, I've heard that Ukraine took more casualties during this than they did during the spring, summer, fall offensive. That offends me and offends you and offends all of us. I've seen estimates like 70, 80,000 deaths. I don't know. The point is, as with any casualties in this war, you have to take them with a massive salt mine. But I don't think, nothing I've seen has indicated to me that the casualties Ukraine suffered in Kursk weren't immense over the entire duration of the operation. And I think a lot of guys did get cut off and encircled and overrun when the Kursk pocket was collapsing. So that has been a major military defeat. Ukraine used a lot of its remaining. Well, it's not. They aren't using reserves. They pulled off a lot of units from other critical areas of the front to throw in there, including some of their remaining decent units. Okay, as I said earlier, Russia has been recruiting and has spent the last year building up a reserve, which can be used for deep battle. We'll get to that in a second. I think Putin was able to, with whatever happened with the Trump negotiations, one of the issues that Putin has had, he's having to deal with his allies, India, Brazil, and China, while sympathetic to him, are also pro peace. Because at the end of the day, Russia did invade another country and grab land from it, and they can't like openly support that. Also, some of those countries like Brazil and India have to do a lot of business with America. And if they're just openly supporting it and going around with it, it's going to look bad. It's also going to hurt Russia's reputation in kind of the third world, and just in the BRICS countries in general. So what Putin was able to say is, look, I went to Trump. I tried to negotiate with him in good faith. I offered what I thought were reasonable terms. I sent Lavrov. I sent all my like ambassadors. I tried to normalize things, but Zelensky just wouldn't agree to any of it. And I tried. Trump is a great guy. We probably could have figured this out, but this is Ukraine's fault. This is on their head. There's really nothing else I can do in this situation other than try to take him out. Now, is that fair? Probably not. I mean, it is an excuse, but it's enough of an excuse that I think a lot of Russia's friends were able to obfuscate or look the other way. There's also the issue that, to my understanding, China was largely a moderating force during this war. And one of the reasons why Russia hasn't gone harder is because China doesn't want to be embarrassed once again, bigger country invading a smaller country and grabbing territory from it. And I recall them and kind of some of the other BRICS nations trying to press Russia to go into negotiations much earlier in the war. Now Trump is in a massive tariff war and fight with China. Xi has a lot of other things to think about, and I don't think he's really that happy and willing to stick out his neck to try to help an American client state. Next, Trump is, for Biden, Project Ukraine was like his heart and soul. It was what he put all his energy and time into. It was what he personally cared about. Trump clearly doesn't. Like, Trump, I think, does have a genuine desire to end the war because of the bloodshed. But I think a lot of it is also he just views it as a waste of time and money. That America's core national interests are not at stake if Ukraine falls. Um, it'll look bad if Ukraine falls, and it'll be embarrassing. But they can still walk away without it directly hurting any of their core interests. So once again, the combination of Biden being gone, Trump not really caring about it, he has lots of other stuff to do. He's trying to purge the bureaucracy in Washington. There's stuff in the Middle East going on. There's the tariff war. The last thing he wants to do is just spend more time on this. And they kind of tried to do it, and then it didn't go anywhere. And I feel like they're kind of getting bored or frustrated or just don't want to deal with it anymore. So there's that. Russia destroyed most of what remained of Ukraine's air defenses. They were pretty badly beat up previously, but I think they're pretty much gone now. I haven't heard anything about Patriot missiles or whatever the other things are that they were supposed to send Ukraine for, I think, months now. So Ukraine doesn't really have any. I mean, they didn't to begin with, but it's especially bad. Russia has actually made a lot of advances. Um, Part of the reason this war is going slowly is back in 2014, once the front lines sort of stabilized in the separatist conflict, Ukraine created the Fortress Belt. Now, the exact cities of the Fortress Belt I haven't really been able to find, but included like Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Chasiv Yar, Bugladar. Touretsk, just cities kind of like that. And there was this series of heavily fortified cities that the Ukrainians had spent the better part of a decade building up and getting ready for exactly this kind of battle. And it's just been a real slog for the Russians to try to get through them. And I think that should be kept in mind whenever you start making fun of them for taking so long. These cities have been fortified very heavily. Also, they're natural fortresses. If you go and look at like Bakhmut, you look at the apartment buildings, they're these giant concrete and steel monstrosities. And artillery shells basically just bounce off of them. Well, they don't bounce off of them, but they just make tiny holes in them. You need basically glide bombs or something bigger in order to take them out. Artillery isn't sufficient, and they're having to go through all of this in urban warfare, often hand-to-hand combat, and it's not fun. But Vuhledar and Avdiivka are gone. I do realize Avdiivka would have been captured before the spring offensive of last year. Touretsk and Chasiv Yar look like they're days away from falling. Russia has control of most of the city there, and we might see either Ukraine withdraw or get encircled. Morale in the Ukrainian army is much worse than it was a year ago. This is once again something that I don't think is controversial. I've seen this pretty much from all sources, be they pro Russian, pro Ukrainian, pro Western. You sometimes will see some cope, but I think there's general agreement that the soldiers are very tired, exhausted. They don't see any way out of this. There's no end in sight, especially with Trump seemingly not caring about the whole thing. Really, the only chance they have is a direct intervention from the US. And with that gone, and just them constantly being hit by drones and artillery and glide bombs and missiles and all this stuff 24/7. Once again, I'm shocked that they have not collapsed yet. Russia has increased its military production. It keeps ramping it up all the time. There were some articles that came out that it said that they actually underestimated how much they were outproducing the West, the collective West. And so as the time goes on, Russia actually, well, is getting increasing its ability to produce weapons, whereas Ukraine's ability to replace its weapons continues to degrade. Also, there's just a great deal of momentum, whatever that means post Kursk. So I wanted to also talk a bit about Russian and Soviet doctrine. Now, I'm not an expert on military doctrine, but I think if you take a look at this, it makes things make a lot more sense. So the Russians and Soviets have a completely different battle doctrine than Western countries do. And this has been true back to the day. Now, my understanding is American battle doctrine, airland battle, or I forget what what they've changed the name to, but it's very much kind of an adaptation of Blitzkrieg. It's you go in, you find a weak point, you hit it really hard, you break through and exploit the breakthrough, and the whole goal is just speed, air superiority, moving as fast as possible, and just overrunning your much less nimble opponent. The Russian view is very, very different, though. So Russians have something called deep battle, and once again, I'm not an expert in this. Sorry, part of the point I'm making by talking about American is an American general who's trained in airland battle would think of the pace that Russia's moving at and the decisions they're making as a sign of weakness. It's not necessarily weakness. One isn't necessarily better than the other. It depends on the circumstances. Part of the issue is that the West was trying to force Ukraine to use airland battle during the spring offensive, but it's, I mean, Ukraine didn't have an air force, so how are you supposed to do combined arms airland battle with no air force? Okay, so the idea behind deep battle is I think this is where the idea that the Russians use human wave tactics comes from. You hear this, the meat assaults, the human wave assaults, that kind of thing. So Early World War II, this was true, where the Russians were just kind of desperately doing counterattacks to try to slow the Germans down that weren't particularly well organized or armed. And they were basically just kind of throwing bodies at the wall and seeing what sticks. That bears a little bit of resemblance to the overall strategy, but not really. So so deep battle is the idea that you attack along the entirety of the front line at once. This was done during the Brusilov offensive in World War II, World War One, and this was also the basis of Operation Bagration in World War II that destroyed Army Group Center. The idea is you get all your guys ready. You get all the supplies that you could possibly need. You get all this firepower, and you just attack the entire line at once. There doesn't need to be a specific weak point. And once you start attacking, you start to see where you're making progress. At some points, if you get bogged down, then those are points that you maybe loosen up on or don't go as hard in. But if there's parts where the line's buckling, you have a lot of reserves ready. And once it buckles, they will rush those areas and break through. So rather than picking a single point in the line and breaking through there and then surrounding the opponent, the Russian idea is to attack across the entire front at once. And this kind of may look like human wave because they're attacking across such a large area, but that's not exactly how it works. This is often a good way of dealing with enemies that are numerically inferior to you because they'll have to spread their guys out more than you will have to. It's also optimizes if you have more firepower and more armored vehicles and stuff like that. Russia also looks at things from the operational perspective, which is I'm not going to go into, but it's rather different. The point is that a lot of the things that Russia's been doing, I think, can be seen as a prelude to a deep battle. And if they were going to do something of this effect and attack the entire front line and have reserves ready, it looks like they're very much in that state. But once again, the point is that you can't use exactly the same metrics to judge Russian military success as American because they just have a completely different conception of it. So, to finish this off, is there an offensive coming? Well, as anything with this war, it's hard to say for certain, but like I said, if Russia was going to launch one, now would be the time. Putin hinted that they're going to finish this war soon in his speech in Murmansk. Now, I don't know if that's him kind of messing with the Ukrainians, if that's him just saying generic patriotic talking points, or if that is an indication of what's to come. But from what I've heard about the situation on the front lines and in the buildup, it does look like there's going to be a Russian offensive, or it's already in its early phases. And once there's a breakthrough, then the reserves will start rushing through, and we might get a war of motion once again. I think also that the Russians have just given up on negotiations, and they think like all these guys, the Europeans are clowns, Zelensky's a clown, Trump is well-meaning, but he doesn't know what he's doing. So we're gonna just end this our way with total military victory. So that's my thoughts on the spring offensive. Once again, let me know if you prefer this format. Um, it actually is a little bit easier for me. It takes a bit more time to kind of put these together, but I do think it makes me more focused and I get through the points a bit better. So once again, if you prefer this, then I'll try to do this more going forward. It does take me less takes to do these, but anyways, guys, God bless, baby steps, and I'll talk to you all again real soon.